So you've just bought a Dreamcast. Maybe it's your first. Maybe it's your first since the early 2000s. Either way, welcome. The Dreamcast is one of those consoles where the library can feel a little overwhelming at first, not because of its size, but because there's a lot of personality packed into it. These aren't necessarily the best Dreamcast games ever made, they're the games that will introduce you to what the Dreamcast is, and why so many of us love it today. These are the 10 Dreamcast games that you need to play first. For me, Crazy Taxi is the embodiment of the Dreamcast. The music, the brands, the completely over-the-top gameplay. It's also of its time that the game feels like an early 2000s time capsule on disc. That iconic soundtrack by The Offspring and Bad Religion is still timeless, and the Dreamcast version itself looks and runs virtually identical to the arcade game. That's thanks to the shared Naomi hardware, with the Dreamcast essentially being part of the same family. From the moment you start playing, it's impossible not to smile. Whether it's the music blasting in your ears, the real world brands lining the street, or the cheeky quips from passengers who get scared, excited, happy or furious depending on how you drive, Crazy Taxi is pure Dreamcast energy. And while it's the perfect pick up and play game, there's far more depth here than it first lets on. Scratch beneath the surface and you'll find a deeply addictive score attack game hiding in plain sight. Master crazy dashes, crazy throughs, crazy drifts and limit cuts, and suddenly what was meant to be a quick go turns into an hour-long session without you even realising. This is the spirit of the Dreamcast without a shadow of a doubt. Cel-shaded visuals were still cutting edge when Jet Set Radio released, and they instantly gave the game a look that was completely its own, and one that still feels fresh today. Like Crazy Taxi, Jet Set Radio is another Dreamcast game that makes you smile while you're playing it. Yes, the challenge ramps up as you progress. Tagging rival gangs' turf becomes increasingly difficult, largely thanks to the close attention of Captain Onishima and his ever-growing army of law enforcement. But the world Sega created here is so beautifully realised that it constantly pulls you back in. The controls are incredibly intuitive. When you approach a rival tag, you hold down the left trigger, mimicking the act of pressing down the nozzle of the spray can. As the paint begins to flow, you use the analog stick to complete a series of movements, with larger tags demanding more complex patterns. These motions aren't arbitrary. They're designed to feel like the movement of your wrist as you spray. It's utterly ingenious. And when you combine that with the pressure of finishing a tag while the police or later SWAT teams are closing in, the tension becomes part of the fun. Yes, it can be frustrating, especially in later stages when the game gets more heavy-handed, but that challenge is exactly what makes Jet Set Radio so memorable. It's stylish, it's playful, and it's unmistakably Dreamcast. The lack of a true next-generation Sonic game on the Saturn was one of Sega's many missteps during the 5th generation. But Sonic Team put that right with Sonic Adventure, a game that saw the blue blur make the jump from 2D to full 3D in genuinely spectacular fashion. Visually, Sonic Adventure is gorgeous, and while the exploration sections between stages might look a little rough compared to the stages themselves, once the real gameplay begins, Sonic is brought to life in a way we'd never seen before. The sense of speed is incredible, whether it's the opening level, Emerald Coast, or later stages like Windy Valley and Speed Highway. Everything that made classic 2D Sonic so enjoyable is translated beautifully into 3 dimensions. Now, it's not without its quirks. The more narrative heavy sections between stages may grate on some players, and the intertwined storylines, along with the need to play as characters like Tails, Knuckles, Amy and Big the Cat, can feel like an inconvenience at first. But those additional perspectives add a layer of depth that Sonic games never had attempted before, and taken as a whole, they make Sonic Adventure feel ambitious and unapologetically Dreamcast. For new Dreamcast owners, this is an essential experience, not just because it's Sonic, but because it represents Sega finally unleashing the mascot on hardware that could keep up with them. When it launched, Shenmue was arguably the most ambitious video game ever made, and even today is arguably the blueprint for what we now think of as the modern open world game. You see, Shenmue isn't just a video game, it's an experience, and if you allow yourself to be immersed in it, you're in for one hell of a ride. You play as Ryo Hazuki setting out to avenge your father's death at the hands of Lan Di, but Shenmue isn't driven by constant action, it's driven by presence. The world feels alive, NPCs have their own daily routines, their own jobs, their own lives. You see a shop or a building, you can walk in and interact with whoever's working or loitering inside. Turn up outside business hours though, and the door is locked, you have to wait. And when you're investigating the whereabouts of the mysterious black car from that day, that waiting time naturally pushes you into other activities, and that's where Shenmue's world really opens up. You can head to the local arcade and pass the time playing arcade-perfect versions of Space Harrier or Hang On. You can explore the world at your own pace, you can talk to whoever you like. Shenmue lets you decide how quickly the story unfolds. Beneath all of this though, sits a surprisingly deep combat system, built on the foundations of Virtua Fighter, which makes sense given that Shenmue originally began life as Virtua Fighter RPG. Ryo can learn new moves, train and gradually improve, skills that you'll need when combat eventually breaks out. The game also introduces quick time events, or QTEs, reactionary moments where you need to press a button or direction the instant it appears on screen. Fail, and there are consequences. You can even work in Shenmue. At the docks, you take on the role as a forklift driver, ferrying crates during the day, and even taking part in forklift races with fellow employees at night. Shenmue is intimate, it's personal, and it's grounded, but Shenmue II expands that vision dramatically. Ryo's journey takes him to Hong Kong, and the game opens up into sprawling cities, increased danger, more complex NPCs, and one of the best character pairings in gaming history. I'm talking about Ryo and Ren. Now, the voice acting in Shenmue hasn't aged particularly well, but if you're playing via an ODE and have access to the fan-made Shenmue Undub, you can experience the first game with spoken Japanese dialogue and vastly improved subtitles. It adds authenticity, and it brings it more in line with Shenmue II, which never received an English dub on Dreamcast, only later on the original Xbox.
蘭亭と呼ばれていたやつだ。親父と何を話してた？鏡をよこせと。俺、その後道場から放り出されて。黒い服のやつらはなんて名乗ってた？それが突然現れて何も。そうか。ありがとう、福さん。
Shenmue is a prime example of Sega's ambition and the Dreamcast's power. It's a heartfelt journey, and ultimately, you get out of it exactly what you're willing to put in. Capcom were one of the Sega Saturn's strongest third-party supporters during the 5th generation, and that relationship only grew stronger on the Dreamcast. Power Stone, which ran on Sega's Naomi arcade board, made the jump to Dreamcast intact and brought with it a style of 3D fighting that simply hadn't existed before. Up to this point, most 3D fighters were still played on a largely 2D plane. Even games like Virtua Fighter 3, which introduced the dodge button, were about stepping in and out of the scenery, not moving freely within it. Power Stone changed that completely. Here, combat takes place in fully interactive arenas viewed from an isometric perspective, with true freedom of movement. And crucially, the environment itself becomes part of the fight. Bins, plant pots, signposts, crates. If you can see it, you can usually pick it up and throw it at your opponent. But the real genius of Power Stone lies in its central mechanic, the Power Stones themselves. Each character begins a match holding a single stone, with a third dropping into the arena during the fight. Collect all three, usually by knocking them out of your opponent, and your character transforms into a powered up version of themselves. For a limited time, you're able to unleash devastating attacks and spectacular screen-filling special moves. As a single-player game, Power Stone offers a solid arcade mode, capped off with 2 challenging bosses. But where it truly comes alive is in Versus mode. If you've just picked up that Dreamcast and you've grabbed a second controller, find a mate, put Power Stone on, and just play. Trust me guys, you will not regret it. A tennis game? Really? Oh, you bet. Virtua Tennis isn't just the best tennis game ever made, It's one of the best sports games and one of the best multiplayer games ever made, full stop. Yes, the player roster is very much of its era. Names like Tommy Haas, Jim Courier, Cedric Pierline and Britain's own Tim Henman will be far more familiar to the 40-something Dreamcast owners than they are to modern audiences. But honestly, that barely matters, because everything else about Virtua Tennis still feels timeless. The venues in particular are superb and instantly recognisable despite not using their official names. Australia Tennis is clearly Melbourne Park, the French Cup is Roland Garros, US Super Tennis is Arthur Ashe Stadium at Flushing Meadows, and the Old England Championship is of course Wimbledon. But the real star of the Dreamcast version is the World Tour mode. It takes what would be otherwise a brilliant arcade sports game and gives it real longevity. You start as the 300th seed in the world and work your way up the rankings by beating opponents and taking part in a variety of minigames designed around the game's mechanics. Those minigames are wonderfully inventive, from smashing clay plates and taking on a tank that fires tennis balls at you, to serving footballs into cardboard goalkeepers, and underpinning all of it is Virtua Tennis's absolutely flawless gameplay. Long rallies are common, you slice, lob, forehand and backhand your way across the court. Your player's body position combined with the direction you use on the D-pad determines the shot that you play. And I'll tell you this, there are few things more satisfying on the Dreamcast than smashing a forehand winner right down the line at match point. For new Dreamcast owners, Virtua Tennis is essential. It's immediate, it's endlessly replayable, and it's proof that Sega could make anything fun if they put their mind to it. Quite simply, Metropolis Street Racer is the best racing game on the Dreamcast, full stop. MSR ushered in a level of visual realism that simply hadn't been seen in racing games before, and it achieved that through real-world locations. The game is set across London, San Francisco and Tokyo, and Bizarre Creations went to extraordinary lengths to recreate them. Each team physically visited each city, took thousands of photographs and painstakingly rebuilt the streets, landmarks and entire districts with remarkable accuracy. But MSR's real success doesn't just come from how it looks, it comes from how it plays. At the heart of the game is its addictive risk versus reward system built around kudos. The game's tagline says it all, it's not how fast you drive, it's how you drive fast. In Metropolis Street Racer you earn kudos for clean racing and skillful driving. Drifts, handbrake turns, late brakes, clean overtakes, but there's a balance to strike here. As each race unfolds, you constantly have to decide whether to play it safe or risk everything by throwing the car sideways through a corner while overtaking a rival. Clip the scenery or collide with another car and you'll be hit with penalty kudos, clearly shown on screen. The real tension comes at the end of the race, where your total earned kudos are calculated and then the penalties are deducted. The main campaign is split into chapters which steadily ramp up speed and difficulty. As you progress, new cars are unlocked and each chapter is made up of a variety of events, street races, overtake challenges, one-on-one duels and hot laps. But here's where MSR really shows its genius. At some point you'll complete all the available events in a chapter and still not quite have enough kudos to unlock the next one. That's then where real decisions begin. To progress, you have to replay previously completed events, sacrificing all the kudos you earned the first time round in the hope that you can drive better, take more risks and squeeze out extra skill kudos by going absolutely hell for leather. To help or hinder you, the game also gives you jokers. These are one-time use wildcards that double all kudos earned, but they also double all penalty kudos. It's a brilliantly tense mechanic, and one that makes every decision feel meaningful. And while Bizarre Creations would later evolve MSR into Project Gotham Racing on the original Xbox, neither that game nor its sequels ever quite matched what MSR achieved here. Despite reusing the kudos system, the changes made to how it was implemented ultimately diluted what made it so special. Metropolis Street Racer remains best in its original form on the Dreamcast, where style, atmosphere and player choice came together perfectly. If there's one game on the Dreamcast that has aged better than almost any other, It's Dead or Alive 2, another title built on Sega's Naomi arcade hardware. DOA 2 arrives on Dreamcast intact and still looks absolutely stunning today. Whether you're playing through the story mode or jumping into time attack, survival or versus mode, the core Dead or Alive gameplay shines through, refined and expanded well beyond the original game. One of the biggest changes is the removal of the traditional danger zones from the first game. In their place are multi-tiered stages that actively become part of the fight. You can knock opponents off rooftops, smash them through windows, or send them crashing into explosive fences, each transition inflicting additional damage and completely changing the flow of the fight. The counter system has also been refined, blocking at just the right moment to unleash a devastating counter, sending your opponent flying through the air or tumbling across the arena is incredibly satisfying, and it gives the game a tactical edge that rewards timing and awareness over button mashing. Now, if you're going to play Dead or Alive 2 on Dreamcast for the first time, I'd strongly recommend tracking down the Japanese limited edition. This version adds 2 additional unlockable characters, Bayman and Tengu, along with 2 additional stages, 70 new costumes, and new modes including sparring and watch mode. It also features an uncensored opening cutscene. And while it may not be quite as content rich as Dead or Alive 2 Hardcore on PlayStation 2, in terms of visual fidelity and sheer smoothness, the Dreamcast version is comfortably superior. You really do need to see DOA 2 running to believe it, and for me, it remains the best game in the series, and one of Itagaki-san's finest pieces of work. The light gun game has sadly been consigned to history. With the passing of time and the evolution of television technology, simply picking up a light gun and blasting away at virtual bad guys isn't as easy as it once was. So by recommending the House of the Dead 2 here, I'm not just encouraging new Dreamcast owners to try out another great game, I'm inviting them to revisit a genre that modern gaming has largely left behind. Originally another title built on Sega's Naomi arcade hardware, the House of the Dead 2 arrives on Dreamcast looking absolutely stunning. Everything we loved about the first game is expanded and improved upon, although thankfully, the gloriously cheesy B-movie voice acting remains intact. It divides opinion, but for many Sega fans it's become an inseparable part of the series' charm and identity. Enemy variety is significantly increased, stages are larger, and the inclusion of branching paths make repeated playthroughs far more engaging. And the boss battles are genuinely sensational. My personal favourite is the third stage boss, Tower, a giant lizard-like creature with 4 bronze heads, all controlled by a central blue one. When you consider that House of the Dead first appeared on Saturn in mid-1998, it's genuinely astonishing that just over a year later we had a port of the House of the Dead 2 in our homes, looking and playing so close to the arcade original. And while the Saturn version is often criticised for its rough textures, the core gameplay always shone through, and when played today on something like Saru, with loading times almost entirely eliminated, it's remarkably close to the coin-op experience. Whether you're playing on a CRT with the official light gun, or using the standard Dreamcast controller with analog stick and triggers, there's still an enormous amount of fun to be had with the House of the Dead 2, and that alone makes it worth experiencing. We finish with a game that deserves its place on any Dreamcast list, Soulcalibur. When Namco made the decision to bring Soulcalibur to Sega hardware, it was a huge moment. Throughout the previous generation, Namco had been synonymous with PlayStation, with multiple Tekken and Ridge Racer titles, as well as the series debut entry Soul Edge or Soul Blade for those of us outside Japan. The arcade version of Soulcalibur ran on Namco's System 12 board, essentially an upgraded PlayStation. But rather than simply porting the arcade game across and calling it a day, Namco went far further. They enhanced Soulcalibur in every possible way. Visually, the upgrade was staggering. Character models were completely reworked to take advantage of the Dreamcast power, with a level of detail that felt almost unreal at the time. Clothing, armour, textures that actually held up under close scrutiny. I remember bringing my Japanese copy home and having my mate Sam over to play it. When we unlocked Lizard Man, We genuinely could not believe that you could make out the individual scales on his skin. That level of detail simply hadn't been seen before. Animations were improved, stages gained enhanced 3D sections, and effects like water and transparencies were vastly upgraded. And on top of all that, Namco added an entirely new character, Cervantes, returning from the original Soul Edge. Soulcalibur was without question a system seller during the Dreamcast's US launch, and while PAL players had to wait until November 26, over a month after the October 14th console launch, it was more than worth the wait. Single player content also saw a massive expansion with the addition of Mission Battle Mode. Here, players travel across the world map, taking on fights with unique conditions, whether that's being poisoned, restricted to certain stances, or only being able to attack from specific positions. Progressing through Mission Battle Mode earns points, which can be spent in the gallery to unlock absolutely stunning artwork created by the game's designers. It's a thoughtful yet rewarding mode, and it adds real longevity beyond the standard arcade version. If you're new to Dreamcast and you truly want to understand just what all the fuss was about, put on Soulcalibur and prepare to be blown away. So there we have it, the 10 games that I recommend that you try first if you've just picked up a shiny new to you, SEGA Dreamcast. For this one, I'd really love our community to get involved in the comments with their own top 10s, because at the end of the day, this list is just my personal recommendations, and with a library as rich as the Dreamcast's, there's always going to be games that some of you feel I've missed, and that's exactly how it should be. As always, thanks again for watching. This has been James, the Segaholic of the Sega Guys, and until next time, we'll see you on the Sega side.